Well, tonight we have just a terrific program, and I'm just going to give you a minute or two of background to the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company. And you're going to be hearing about some of the people who actually worked at the Boston and Sandwich Glass Factory. For those of you who aren't that familiar with it, it was an institution here that survived in the 19th century from 1825 to 1888. It employed more than 550 people full-time here, working 2 hours, four shifts during the day. It changed the face of Sandwich from a little backwater agricultural area that was eking its way to get by to an organization, to a town that actually became very, very prosperous. And if you see Main Street today, and you see the large houses on Main Street, that was because of the Glass Museum, because the superintendent lived on that street, the Mr. Waterman, the paymaster lived there. Some of the most skilled workers there were the mold makers to make the pressed glass lived there. In addition, we have a whole area called Liberty Street that was one time a farm, and Deming Jarvis was the man who started this organization down here, and he bought that farm and turned it into Liberty Street, where most of the most skilled workers lived. The people who were the gaffers, who were the head of a team of 5 people that made glass here. And then, of course, down in Jarvisville, on the other side of the tracks, if you will, we had a lot of people who worked directly at the factory, maybe not as skilled as some of the others, but they're the heart and soul of the organization. And many of them were from Ireland. So my parents are from Ireland, and this is special to me, so I wore my Irish sweater tonight. And I even brought with me my scally cap to do the introduction. So it is delightful for me to introduce to you, it almost sounds like a law firm of Steele and Deal, but it really isn't. It's Susan Steele and Patricia Deal, who were members and board members of the Irish Ancestral Research Association, going by the acronym of TIARA. I don't know which came first. You got TIARA and then had to create the word, or you got the organization that came out TIARA. But in any event, you're going to hear about some of the families that came to America in the 19th century, the immigrants from Ireland who came here to a strange land from an area that was a colonial oppressed area by the British. They didn't have the freedom of opportunity. They certainly couldn't practice their religion. When they got here, they established their own church right here in Sandwich in 1830, the first Catholic place of worship outside of the city of Boston. In fact, if you left Boston and next time you find a Catholic place of worship was when you got to Rhode Island in 1830. So this has a very rich history to the Irish immigrant story. So with that, let me go on no further and ask Susan Steele to come up and begin the program. Thank you very much.
So Bill already did our whole talk, so we're finished. Now, thanks all for coming out. We're delighted to be speaking in this setting, the museum that's preserved so much of the glassworker history. We're also aware that we have at least one descendant of a glassworker in the audience. And are there any other descendants of glassworkers or people connected to the company in another way? I see 2 hands, oh, 5. So we might have experts in the audience, and we'd be happy to have your input, correct us, tell us a story at the end of the presentation. So if I find the remote and if I do it right, okay. On the screen are workers at Boston and Sandwich Glass Company in the early 1880s. Among the workers pictured are John, Philip, and Ellen Brady, members of an Irish family working at the glass company. We'll be talking about the Bradys as well as a number of other Irish families in Sandwich. And after hearing our introduction, hearing about TIARA, the Irish Ancestral Research Association, you might guess that we would be interested in stories about the Irish. But what led us to the Irish in Sandwich? So Pat and I have worked on a special project TIARA has done called the Foresters Project. And what is the Foresters Project? It's not an effort to save trees. We save historic records instead. And the records in this case are the life insurance policies of the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. It's a group that's been in existence since 1879. They're a fraternal group that had courts or chapters in towns and cities throughout Massachusetts. And Sandwich had its own court called St. Agatha Court. The Forester life insurance policies are now located at UMass Boston, and they're a treasure trove of information of interest to historians as well as genealogists. So this is a listing of some of the members of St. Agatha's Court. Pat and I spent time going through the records of court members, and individual policies provide information about birth and death dates, and that's what you can see in the middle of the screen, place of birth, occupation, and so much more. Family history enthusiasts have found some amazing material, including wills and correspondence with family members. When numbers of policies are looked at together as a group, interesting themes emerge. And one of those themes involves membership in towns where a particular industry dominated the economy. So we knew about the glass industry in Sandwich and decided to look at those workers. And here are 3 St. Agatha Court members who listed glass worker occupations. So there's Timothy, too fast. Timothy Buckley, glass worker in the glass business. John Maley, glass maker, making glass. And Annie Coffey, decorator in the glass business. So these workers joined the Foresters between the years of 1899 and 1907. So we're learning about their occupations during that time period. We thought this was odd that we only found 3 members of St. Agatha Court who gave glass-making occupations. And we knew that the sandwich glass industry had been quite large at one time, so we expected to find more glass workers. We realized we needed to learn about the industry timeline before we would know when and where to look for additional workers.
So we made a trip here to the Sandwich Historical Society, Sandwich Glass Museum. Susan and I met Dorothy Hogan Schofield, curator of collections, who introduced us to some incredible resources available upstairs, worker cards and files. The cards give information about glass workers and were created in the 1980s by thank you. Martha Hassel, former historical curator at the museum. Notes were added by various staff members over the years. There are cards on about 1,800 sandwich glass workers. Here's Ellen Brady. This is what the cards look like. You can see the information. on there. And her father, Edward Brady. These cards give information about occupation, birth country, and family relationships. They refer to the census and the town directory. In addition to the cards, some worker files include obituaries, newspaper articles, and even family trees. You'll see examples coming up. We also found family files and photos at the Sandwich Archives and the Sandwich Public Library, where we worked with former archivist Barbara Gill and current archivist Deb Rich. Here is an example of a McLaughlin family sheet, which lists, as you can see, parents and lists of the children that as far as they knew them. Another key source for worker information was found in the books The Glass Industry in Sandwich by Raymond Barlow and Joan Kaiser. Volume 5 includes a personnel list of glass workers, including where available, birth and death dates, start and end dates of glass factory work, as well as their job descriptions. We used this list to extract the records of Irish workers, finding about 500 glass workers who were Irish-born or of Irish descent. This example of the personnel list includes some of the 28 glass workers with the surname Brady. As production in the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company grew, so did the demand for labor and the parallel growth of Irish immigrants arriving in Sandwich. From the 5 Irish workers listed on the 1826 payroll, by 1860, the Irish number of Irish-born men over the age of 20 in Sandwich was at 147, a high mark in glass production. Also of note in the 1860 federal census is the inclusion of approximately 30 Irish-born women listed as in service, primarily in Yankee households. By 1880, the number of Irish-born male heads of households had declined, while the number of women, primarily widows, heading households had increased. Having identified the Irish workers, we wanted to learn more about the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company, the community of Jarvisville, and the workers' lives in Sandwich.
So here's an 1884 map of Sandwich. Irish immigrants, along with first and second generation family members, continued to join the growing workforce at Boston and Sandwich Glass. Deming Jarvis established worker housing near the factory, with the area taking his name, Jarvisville. Housing for the Irish and other workers grew. The company appears at the bottom of the screen. So here it is down here, and you can see what an important presence it was in Sandwich. The housing for the workers surrounded on both sides, and then St. Peter's Church, their church, up here in the upper right. The Irish who came to Sandwich were the first infusion of an ethnic group in an area of majority Yankee and English Protestant population. In 1830, over 20 families of the 371 inhabitants of Jarvisville were Irish Catholics. On the top left side of the screen is an early sketch, whoops, back to it, okay, here we are, of St. Peter's Church. It was replaced by a larger St. Peter's in 1854, and the old building was an early example of architectural recycling. It was moved and reused as a store. So you can see the store down at the bottom left. And part of that old building still appears at 23 Jarvis Street. And you can see the sign on the outside designating its early history. In addition to the church, there was a company store and a park. Working men were allowed to pay for company-built houses on an installment plan. There was also an authorization to paint all the company's tenant houses and comments afterwards on the bright, cheerful appearance. Mr. Jarvis knew from personal experience that skilled workers could be recruited to go elsewhere to practice their trade, and he had done that himself when he recruited his first workers. He hoped to keep the workers from moving on. A school was built on company land. An increase in taxes collected from the company helped the town fund the school. Benefits such as the picnic outing were provided by the company. Bands were organized by workers and other townspeople with some company and church backing. The band members here include Sandwich Glass Workers, Michael and Thomas Buckley, James and Thomas Kelleher, and Jay Dalton. And there are actually a lot more Irish names. These men had roots in Irish counties stretching from the far north of Ireland to the south. So the Irish residents were getting to know each other in these activities, as well as joining into the greater Sandwich community.
The assimilation in the community was not always smooth. There seemed to be a mixed attitude toward Sandwich's newer residents. In a 1832 meeting with clergy, Irish workers told a visiting bishop that the glass house was a very bigoted place, and the agents and officers of the company were much opposed to Catholics. However, as the glassworks prospered, so did the town prosper, and so did the Irish Catholics. The local press reported on numerous social and cultural events in which the Catholics as individuals and as a society took a prominent part. This is an excerpt of an 1859 article about a picnic to raise money for a bell for the Second St. Peter's Church. 300 men, women, and children attended. The paper wrote, "Everyone seemed to enjoy the occasion, though this was but the first attempt of the kind which had been carried into effect by the Catholics of Sandwich. Yet for a first attempt, the experiment was very successful. Harmony and good order prevailed throughout the entire day." The Irish in Sandwich gave every indication that they were here to stay and move toward integration in their new country. Many Irish men took the step to become naturalized citizens. The example on the screen is from an 1842 naturalization form completed by John McLaughlin of Culdaff, County Donegal. We'll be talking about the McLaughlins later. The Civil War was an equalizer. Sandwich men across all backgrounds responded to the call of President Lincoln. The plaque on the screen lists the roster of Sandwich men who served in the Civil War, including the names of many Irish soldiers. The project to identify these men was spearheaded by Bill Daly, who, with the help of Stauffer Miller, researched the 294 Sandwich men who served, including the 54 who lost their lives. The plaque was installed in the Sandwich Town Hall a year ago. Every Irish immigrant family had an interesting story. We have chosen tonight to talk about 4 families in greater detail.
So the Swansea family was one of the early Irish families in Sandwich. On the screen is a family tree found in the worker files upstairs. These trees provided great starting points that could be checked with the census and vital records. In this tree, the arrow points to Terence Swansea, who came to Sandwich from Lochgilly, County Armagh, Ireland. His headstone, and you won't be able to read it, but his headstone gives the townland, Coronor, the place he was born. And we genealogists view this naming of the townland, of course, as a fantastic gift. We spend countless hours looking for that piece of information. quick overview of the Swanseas. Terence was married in Boston and was in Sandwich for the 1831 birth of his first child. In an 1835 Sandwich Glass payroll, Terence was listed as taking glass by horse and wagon to the boat for shipping. Now, this is the one slide, of course, Ireland, that did not come out well. But it seems like the glassmaking skills may have been part of the Swansea family's Irish heritage. Their home in Lough Gilly, down near the Green Arrow, County Armagh, was less than 9 miles from Newry, Ireland, a center for glassmaking from the late 1700s to the early 1800s. One significant Newry glass house closed in 1827, coordinating with the probable Swansea immigration to Sandwich. There are other Sandwich glassmaking families from Lough Gilly, other areas of County Armagh, and the neighboring counties of Tyrone and Donegal. In the first generation of Swanseas born here, son Peter Swansea started working at Boston and Sandwich Glass at age 11 and rose to the skilled position of gaffer or master glassblower. His brother Patrick also began work as a boy and stayed at Sandwich Glass until it closed. Patrick was a glassblower and invented a mold for making pressed glass lampshades. Next generation members, William, Charles, and John Joseph, also worked at the glassworks as boys. There's a letter in the Swansea file from the daughter of Charles Swansea. She gives the description of her father's job as sticker-up boy, the boy who moved the molten glass. This West Virginia Glassworks photo, taken in 1908, reminds us that there were some very young boys in the glassworks well into the 1900s. When Boston and Sandwich Glass Company closed, some Swansea family members, Patrick and John, became part of the cooperative that reopened in Sandwich. Other Swanseas relocated in order to stay in the industry. Peter went to Union Glass in Somerville, William went to Pennsylvania, and George went to New Bedford. Charles also moved to New Bedford, but later returned to Sandwich. And Charles paid tribute to his early years at Sandwich Glass in his painting here of the Upper Glass House. When Charles's uncle, Peter Swansea, died in 1922, an obituary highlighted his career in glassmaking. It begins, "The many friends of Peter Swansea throughout the Flint glass trade will be grieved to learn of his death." It goes on to tell of his 50 years in the industry and says he was known as one of the most expert glassmakers in the trade. And now Pat will tell you of another family with multiple members in the glass trade.
One family name came to our attention early on as it appeared 28 times in the personnel list. With the help of family sheets at the Sandwich Archive, we were able to sort through the various Brady families, their county of origin, and their children. Counting only glass workers, there were 4 Brady men from County Fermanagh, 3 from County Cavan, and 1 man from County Waterford. Some of these men were brothers, and most had children who also worked in the glass factory. All of the Bradys on the slide were glass workers. The immigrant head of the family is on the left, with their children below them, all with their date of birth. In a file letter written by Joan Kaiser, we learn of the first Brady to arrive in Sandwich. Joan writes, "Brady was hired from Ireland when the factory converted the upper house to coal. Brady was supposed to be the best stoker in the world. The lower house was designed to his specification. This worker was Edward Brady, born in 1798 from Enniskillen, County Fermanagh, who arrived in Sandwich about 1836. Another Edward from County Fermanagh was a blower and presser at the glass factory. This Edward served in the Civil War as first sergeant in the 29th Mass Infantry Company D, the Sandwich Guards. He was an active member of the Major Charles Chipman GAR Post 132 throughout his life. 4 of his children worked in the glass factory. Daughter Ellen was a decorator and later became a bookkeeper. Son Robert went to Boston and rose to become political editor of the Boston Post. Edward's son Charles started as a boy at the glass factory and then became an organ tuner. Later, he served the town of Sandwich as postmaster and at the time of his 1920 death was a selectman. Another Charles Brady from County Fermanagh worked as a blower and presser and also served in Civil War. This Charles was promoted to captain of Company D when Charles Chipman was promoted to major. Following the war, Charles Brady moved his family to the city of Cambridge, where he was predeceased by 7 of his young adult children, all primarily from consumption. Charles died in 1909 at the Chelsea Soldiers' Home and was buried in Holy Cross Cemetery in Malden. In 2015, when Tiara realized that Charles's grave remained unmarked, we were able to order a stone for him through the Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay. Brothers John, Philip, and Hugh Brady came to Sandwich from County Cavan. All three worked as sharers in the glass factory, as did several of their children. Philip Brady, the son of John, worked in the decorating department, and his death at age 43 was attributed to lead poisoning from that position. By 1865, Hugh Brady had purchased a piece of land surrounded by marsh that became known as Brady Island. Oh, sorry. There's the Brady Island. Okay. Here Hugh and his wife Bridget raised 15 children, 5 of whom are on the personnel list. Following his time at the glass factory, Hugh worked as a railroad flagman. At the time of his 1925 death, Hugh Brady was perhaps the last Irish-born glass worker still living in Sandwich.
The 2 previous families were from the north of Ireland. The McLaughlins of County Donegal were also from the north. Their jam-packed file included many wonders. Again, a family tree was most helpful in sorting out this clan. So I think we have right here a descendant of the McLaughlin family, right? Oh, okay, yep. So starting off, John McLaughlin, a schoolmaster and a violinist in Ireland, immigrated in 1825 with his parents and sister. John and wife Mary Kenny had 14 children, all born in Sandwich. And some of those children spent early years at the glassworks and then went on to other professions. Here are 3. These are the 3 that I hope to point out. Anna at the top, who worked as a burnisher. And I like how it has even the description of a burnisher, person who polishes or makes glossy. The middle, George McLaughlin, president of Boston and Sandwich Glass Company number 3 in 1904. And down at the bottom, Margaret, according to the 1870 census, Margaret was working in the glassworks. So also I want to mention that Margaret, remember the Forrester records that got us started on this project. Margaret was an active member of St. Agatha Court, serving in the top position as chief ranger for over 20 years. Music figured prominently in this family as both an avocation and a profession. At least 4 McLaughlin women were active in church music programs. Sarah led both the children's and adults choir at St. Peter's Church. She performed as a soloist along with sisters Mary and Margaret. Sarah also taught in Sandwich's public schools and later served on the school committee and was a trustee of the Sandwich Public Library. Teresa, mentioned as the organist in this 1881 review, was a composer who had a piece performed by the Boston Museum Orchestra, and that's the piece right up on screen. The McLaughlin men were equally talented, playing musical instruments, singing, tuning pianos, and founding their own businesses. George McLaughlin, up on the screen, may have worked at the glass company briefly in his early years, but at age 19, he left Sandwich for Boston. George and a partner founded the New England Organ Company. Several of his brothers joined him in Boston to work for that company. But George never lost his connection to Sandwich. In the 1880s, he was on a committee involved with the management and shareholders of Sandwich Glass, and later spearheaded efforts to keep the factory open after the 1888 strike. When George moved back to Sandwich, he began a whole new career serving his town and state. So here's an older George in the derby hat. George is shown with the Sandwich Brass Band in 1889. George was not a member of the band, but he may have been out gathering votes. It's likely that George used his family, church, and Irish community connections as he attained positions in town and state politics. Several of the names on the McLaughlin marriage list on the left, Shevlin, McArdle, and Kelleher, will be mentioned later as selectmen. George's own contributions to town and state governance are listed on the right. The McLaughlin family's participation in church and community functions was most likely an asset for George. There were some grumbles in the press about George's ability to get out the vote. George McLaughlin's success in Sandwich and beyond was noted in many newspaper articles. A letter written to the Barnstable Patriot upon George's death in 1928 stated, "I do not know where there was such a man like him, who could hold the affections and love of those men and women of his own political party, and at the same time generally enjoy the highest respect and admiration of his opponents." The letter was signed John F. Fitzgerald of Boston, otherwise known as Honey Fitz. George McLaughlin's success in Sandwich was also evident in the grand house he built on a lot between Canary and Freeman Streets. This large home accommodated George, his wife and daughter, and his many unmarried sisters. This was just one of the several properties he bequeathed to family members. And now Pat will tell you of another family who made their own contributions to Sandwich.
John Kelleher from County Kerry and Ellen Connell of County Cork were married in 1857 in Sandwich, where they raised 8 children. Their home on Dewey Street had been occupied by family or family friends for over 150 years until this past spring. The portraits on this slide of John and Ellen Kelleher, as well as pieces decorated by their daughters, and additional glass pieces were donated to the Sandwich Glass Museum this year. Mary and Ellen are Nell, the only daughters of John and Ellen Kelleher, joined 3 of their brothers working in the glass factory. In this 1885 photo of the decorating department, Nell Kelleher is in the front row, first woman on the left. Her sister Mary is in the front row, third from the left. As decorators, they painted delicate designs in enamel on translucent or opaque glass. On the right are samples of the Kelleher sisters' work. The plate on the top has been on display at the Sandwich Glass Museum for several years. We believe that the photo on the left is a group of decorators in a more relaxed setting. Decorators had the potential to earn a good wage in the 1880s, $15 or $16 a week. We read comments on the decorators being among the best dressed women in Sandwich, and they look like they are living up to that reputation in this photo. The studio photos on the right are of Nell at top and Mary on the bottom. Both Kelleher sisters are listed as decorators in the 1908 Sandwich Directory, but in September 1910, we read of Mary Kelleher and her sister-in-law, Margaret McLaughlin Kelleher, going to New Bedford to visit Miss Nellie, who was in the hospital. The next month, we read that Miss Nellie Kelleher has returned from St. Luke's Hospital after her long absence from home, somewhat improved in health. This illness left Nell with a form of paralysis that required her to use a wheelchair for the remainder of her life. This is a photo of the Kelleher sisters in their later years, still living in the worker house their father purchased from Deming Jarvis. After their years as glass decorators, the sisters continued artistic pursuits, including fine needlework. This quilt is attributed to both Mary and Nell. Labeled Flying Geese, it is now in the collection of the New England Quilt Museum in Lowell. It is quite remarkable that the work of these sisters from 2 phases of their lives is in the permanent collections of 2 fine museums, the Sandwich Glass Museum and the New England Quilt Museum. 3 of the Kelleher brothers, William, John, and Thomas, worked in the glass factory as young men. John Kelleher owned a hardware, later they became involved in businessmen in town. John Kelleher owned a hardware store on Java Street, advertising plumbing and heating services and selling stoves and ranges. James Kelleher harvested ice from Shum Lake and also went into the coal business. Following his glass factory work, Thomas Kelleher became a carpenter and then a contractor. During his career, he was responsible for building many churches and public buildings, particularly in this Cape area. One of his first large projects was construction of the Corpus Christi Church on Java Street, which was dedicated in 1901. Both Thomas and James Kelleher served the town as selectmen.
The first generation of Irish families came to Sandwich for work and set down roots in the town. The children and grandchildren were established in the community. Sandwich was their home base. When the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company closed in 1888, it was an economic hardship for all. Glass-related industries continued into the 20th century, but on a much smaller scale. Glass workers looked for jobs elsewhere or changed professions. The families that remained in Sandwich took their place in the community, becoming involved in business and civic affairs. The listing of selectmen of Irish descent reflects their commitment to service. The Irish in Sandwich took a leap of faith when they crossed the ocean in search of opportunities in a new country. Many of these Irish families were connected by marriage, where they came from, where they lived in town, place of employment, religion, and cultural activities. They married each other's sons and daughters, traded at each other's businesses, supported each other in politics, and sang at each other's funerals. When 73-year-old George McLaughlin sang his solo at the 1920 funeral of his friend Charles Brady, those in attendance must have felt the end of an era.
The glassworkers in Sandwich, whether from Ireland, England, other countries, or native to the town, established a legacy that continues. Sandwich glass, known for its quality and affordability, was used in households throughout New England and beyond. Sandwich glass pieces continue to hold a pride of place in many homes today, and their value continues to increase. Their descendants can take pride in this heritage. The Sandwich Glass Museum and Sandwich Historical Society honor this legacy through the exhibits here and by preserving the company records. The files maintained by the Sandwich Archive also contribute to this history. We have been privileged to access these records in order to study one set of glassworkers. We thank Dorothy Hogan Schofield for the help she provided in identifying relevant records during our multiple visits, and also town archivists Barbara Gill and Deb Rich. We acknowledge the depth of research on sandwich glass and the glassworkers done by Raymond Barlow and Joan Kaiser and many other authors. We thank Bill Daly, coordinator of the Talk of the Town speaker series, and the Sandwich Glass Museum for presenting us with the opportunity to share these stories with you this evening. It was our honor to get to know the families we studied. Thank you.
Any questions for the presenters about anything they covered?
We heard some comments from people connected to the glass company.
Comments, if somebody wants.
Comments, all right. I know we have some here who live in Jarvisville, who live in what was the shadow of the factory at the time. So while you're thinking about raising your hand, I'll just point out a couple of things. One,
I want to point out our material we brought too.
okay. One is a reference to the school that was seen in one of the earlier slides as the Jarvisville School. Actually, it was in the Jarvisville district. It was called the Sand Hill School, and it serviced exclusively the children of the Boston and Sandwich Glass workers. That building today, or its later variation, is the Clark Haddad building that's going to be on, there's a little plug here, it's going to be on a town meeting to see if the townspeople would restore that building for community usage. And prior to it being Clark Haddad name, it was the Sand Hill School that honored and housed all of those little kids from the Jarvisville area. The other point I'd make to you is there's a reference to St. Peter's Church. And these two ladies have come all the way down from the big city of Boston, practically, so they don't know some of the intricacies of our little town here. We got JP in Arlington. Both of these ladies are from those respective towns. St. Peter's Church, you saw a photograph of that. That no longer exists. That was destroyed in the famous Portland Gale of 1898, which destroyed a great deal of the East Coast and toppled that particular church to the point where it is no longer habitable. And in 1901, the Irish finally moved across, the Irish Catholic Church ceremony, moved across the railroad tracks, and the church was then called Corpus Christi because the pastor of those churches at that time had tremendous power. And for whatever reason, the pastor thought Corpus Christi is a much nicer name than St. Peter's, and they changed the name. But if you go up Grove Street to a cemetery, you'll find St. Peter's Cemetery at the top of Grove Street, which is often one of those great dilemmas. Why is there a St. Peter's Cemetery? There's no St. Peter's Church. Now you know. Isn't that neat? So that was a warm-up to anyone that might have comment, question, before we close this evening out? Okay. We have a question from the back. Yes, sir.
What caused the economic decline or closing of the glass factory?
Go ahead.
I think that there were a few factors that caused that, and some of you in the room may be more expert on this than we are, but from what we've read, one was competition from cheaper glass, and particularly to the west. The quality that the Sandwich Glass factory maintained was a high quality glass, and it was more expensive to make. And they were making cheaper glass in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey and even further west, Ohio. So that was one factor. There was a lot of competition. The second factor was that we had the Industrial Revolution, and then union organizing was a big thing. And there were the American Flint glass workers who went on strike pretty much across the country. And some of the glass workers at Sandwich had gotten involved in that and had a certain set of demands, some of which were coming from their national organization. I'm not sure anyone thought that it was going to come to a closing when they did the striking or the walkouts. And if it were left to probably, maybe I'm jumping here, Bill, but if it had been left to just the Sandwich Glass workers, they might have come to a resolution. But there was pressure as part of this national union, and also the company had not been as profitable as it previously had been due to the competition in the West. So I think for those two reasons, they decided there was the walkout. We were not making the money we thought we should be making. If we close the doors will be closed. And I don't think anyone took that seriously, so it was very heartbreaking.
I have a question. The forest strikes, what made you decide to do some in-depth research on the glass workers?
So it was actually, we had done other companies in other towns. We did across the bridge, the Plymouth Cordage Company, and they had a fantastic amount of members in the foresters at the Plymouth Cordage Company. And actually, we didn't do Irish there. We did German-speaking people from Alsace-Lorraine. We also have done mill workers in Lawrence. So as we were indexing these forester records, it would jump up at us that there was a concentrated group who all gave a similar occupation. So we got interested in, as we said, towns where, we also did Peabody, leather workers in Peabody. So we're on a roll. And want to mention also before we end that we did bring some Tiara brochures, upcoming events at Tiara. And so if any of you do have Irish heritage, interested in genealogy or history, we do meet at Brandeis in Waltham, which is a bit of a trek, but occasionally we have meetings on the South Shore. We co-sponsor meetings. So if you're interested, take a brochure. And any other?
One more?
Yes.
I heard you refer, I think when you were talking about the Swansea, that he came from somewhere near Newry.
Yes.
And I wondered when you were going through the notes, if you found any references to places where the glass workers had worked in Ireland before they came here?
We didn't find a direct connection. You know, we found that one strong hint about the people that came from the area near Newry that might have been connected, but did we ever find a direct connection?
Edward Brady, the stoker who came, who had been recruited by Deming Jarvis when the Opera House was being converted to coal. He needed someone who had a background in coal, and he recruited Edward Brady, who was the oldest of that Brady group that came over. And then they said the Lower House was designed to his specification. It's one thing one thing I noticed on some of the maps that'll list the names of the people and the houses they lived in, and I noticed Edward Brady's house was about as close to the glass factory as it could possibly get, I presume because he was in charge of the furnaces and so forth, and, he would just have to literally hop over the fence to get into the factory. But he's one.
There's also the jump that, and Pat knows this better, that when I mentioned that Deming Jarvis had recruited some of these Irish glassmakers, they had worked in South Boston before coming to...
Boston, too.
And you know more about that.
Before he founded Sandwich Glass, Deming Jarvis was on the board of New England Glass Company in Cambridge, in the Leachmere area. And we have to think that when he came down, he brought some of those initial workers with him. You also can see in the 1820 census shows some of the same names that we see coming down in that first payroll at a Boston glass factory also, on Essex Street in Boston. So he knew who was who. And there's a whole story about why he was into this industry, but the fact is America needed to stop making its own products, and glass was in high demand.
Seeing no more questions, thank you very much for coming for our fifth and final. So our fifth and final Talk of the Town series. Have a good evening, everyone, and thank you, ladies, very much.